All right, everyone. I'm going to do my very best to summarize this chapter as a non-mathematician. I'm glad Gopi is here. So, as Steiner has been reiterating in many of the previous lectures, he really wants us to be very careful to remain within real concepts and not allow ourselves to spin webs of thoughts that are disconnected from experience. And so, while in astronomy, we're inevitably going to be using figures and forms and numbers, he says that because of the incommensurabilities, for example, of the ratios of the revolutions of the planets, he thinks that we're going to need to strive for something qualitative, even within this mathematical approach. Astronomy, he says, can only give us mere images, and to understand those images, he says we need to understand the nature of the human being. So I'll return to that. But first, he says he's going to introduce some graspably ungraspable ideas, and he introduces Cassini curves. Steiner introduces ellipses and hyperbola, and the way in which we can move from an understanding of ellipses, which have to do with a constant sum, and hyperbola, which have to do with constant difference, to the idea of curves of of the constant product. And this was a form of mathematics developed by Cassini, this French-Italian astronomer and astrologer, actually, for King Louis the 14th, I believe. And he was observing the rings around Saturn, and he was grappling with Kepler's new understanding of planetary orbits as ellipses. And he actually convinced Basilica in Bologna, I believe it was, to allow him to erect some equipment to create a camera obscura. And he could track the image of the sun on the floor of this basilica over the course of the year and see how it would shrink and grow, which was a confirmation for him of the elliptical path of the Earth's orbit around the sun, right? When the Earth would be further from the sun, the image would appear smaller on the basilica floor and vice versa. And so he was quite an able mathematician, and he also wanted to understand the rings of Saturn and tried to develop some mathematics for that. He also built some pretty powerful telescopes for his day and was the first to discover this gap in the ring of Saturn and to observe the ways in which Saturn has I believe, a 14-year season, no, 7-year seasonal cycles, which have to do with its axial tilt, which you can see displayed in this image of Saturn. There would be a time during this seasonal cycle when the rings wouldn't even be visible because we'd be from Earth looking straight on at them. So he developed the mathematics of Cassini ovals, which I'm going to show you an animation of here. This is from Wolfram's website, which is quite handy. You can actually play with this. So as B becomes less than A, you get these branches, these two seemingly separate circles. As B grows to be equal with A, you get a lemniscate. And as B is greater than A,
Matt, we are not seeing any changes. Are you making any changes while you're talking, or?
Oh, hold on. Yeah, there should be animation there. I think I need to click optimize for video. Try that again. Thanks, Gopi. Are you seeing the movement now?
Yes, there we go.
There we go. Yeah. So Steiner explains the mathematics of this, and I needed to see it animated to really grasp. There's footnotes in my edition that try to indicate when Steiner is pointing at various aspects of the curves that he's drawing, but this was really helpful for me. I won't display my ignorance by trying to get into the details. Hopefully Gopi and others can do that later for us. What I really want to focus on is Steiner's indications for how to move beyond just the the forms and figures of mathematics into a qualitative appreciation for the relationship between our own ideational and imaginative inner life and the mere images that astronomy can give us, right? So he says astronomy can only provide us with the mere images, and that we need to understand how images arise in human beings to bring those mere images into some conception of reality. He says, so you see, mathematics itself provides us with facts that oblige us to leave space, if we want to preserve the continuity of mental representations. So he's talking about the curves when B is less than A, when you get these two separate branches that seem to be two separate ovals. He says the mathematics itself is compelling us to leave space to maintain the continuity of our own inner imagery, our own inner ideation, right? So we must somehow leave space behind if we want to orient ourselves properly. He says the underlying structure of the human organism is of such a nature that it cannot be comprehended solely in anatomical terms. Just as we're driven out of space by the Cassini curve, in contemplating human nature, we're likewise driven out of the body by the mode of contemplation itself. We're driven out of the realm that can be grasped empirically by the physical senses. To advocate such things is no sin against scientific rigor. Such ideas are far removed from the purely hypothetical fantasies that are often entertained in connection with natural phenomena, for they refer to the whole way in which we're connected organically with the universe as human beings. And then he ends this chapter with these really interesting lines, and I want to show what I think he's hinting at here. He says, instead of looking at the human form from in front, they look at nature from behind, and that's how they arrive at all their various theories concerning human nature. So the typical approach to astronomy and natural science sort of brackets the human being, doesn't consider human nature, doesn't consider the nature of the one doing the observation, doing the mathematical calculation. Instead, and when they put the human to the side, we end up looking at nature from behind, right? And I think what he means here is somewhat akin to Plato's problem of the planet. So when we look at the heavens from our perspective on the Earth, and we observe retrograde motion of the planets displayed here with a series of snapshots. I believe this is Mars. Copernicus is thought to have solved this problem, right, by putting the sun at the center, and we can understand retrograde motion as the apparent motion caused by the Earth kind of catching up with Mars and then going past it. Going all the way back to Plato and the Republic, he describes the wandering motion of planets when they go retrograde in this way. He refers to them with the analogy of embroidery. So he says these embroideries in the heavens are decorations on a visible surface and are to be regarded as the fairest and most exact of material things. But we must recognize that they fall far short of the truth that can be apprehended only by thought, not by sight. We must use the blazonry of the heavens as patterns to aid in the study of those realities, just as one would do who chanced upon diagrams drawn with special care by an artist. And so I think with Plato's analogy here to embroidery, we can imagine the visible heavens, the way that the retrograde motion appears to our physical senses as kind of like the back side, the reverse side of an embroidered pattern, which can look really chaotic, right? Because really, to get the proper perspective that the artist intended, we have to look at the embroidery from the other side. And so there's this topological inversion that Steiner is inviting us to consider. And it's already there implicit in Plato in his attempt to understand what appears chaotic to the physical senses is actually highly intelligently ordered from the proper perspective, right? And so when Steiner is referring to the need to put the human being at the center of astronomy and to understand the nature of human ideation as intimately linked to the images that our physical eyes show us in the heavens, I think he's indicating something very similar to what Plato was getting at. With his metaphor of embroidery, we need to see the embroidery from the right side, rather than trying to construct hypothetical models that would explain the chaotic motion that we see with our physical senses. So that's what I've got for you. I'm eager for those of you with a better understanding of Cassini curves to jump in and help us really grok why Steiner was driven to use that particular set of mathematics as an example. Cassini certainly seemed to think that it was relevant to the actual motion of planetary bodies, and astronomy has, what I read at least, has kind of moved on from that perspective. But it seems that Steiner thinks that we shouldn't move so fast. So I'll stop there and invite comments from others.
I don't have advanced mathematical knowledge. I mean, I roughly understand what he's saying, but I just quickly wanted to throw in, I guess it's obvious he's really presenting this morphological relationship, as these shapes and geometrical forms change. So it brings us back to morphology again.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I would like to encourage everybody to work these relations out on their own notebooks and things like that, because I think it's extremely critical, especially even if it is just a reminder of what we did in high school or whenever, of generating those equations and the y equals plus or minus square root and so on, because it's by doing that you realize this, how beautifully the relation is brought out for the circle. If you can derive the relations for the circle, we are never taught of circle as ratio between 2 points, ever. I have never seen that throughout the mathematical career, throughout physics, nowhere. This is the first place that I encountered it. Circle as a ratio of 2 distances. It's absolutely fascinating, and turning that inside out is also, again, unique, because a circle is a circle. Like, people don't ever think of outside the circle being switched with the inside of the circle. And what I think is relevant here, which will become relevant even more later on, mentions the orbits of Mercury and Venus not really being able to be drawn in space. It's this odd comment that comes later on. I forget which lecture, but it's in the same lecture series. And I pondered on that for quite a while. Like, why is that being said? Why, like, Mercury and Venus are being seen as something different from the orbits that we are used to seeing? So then one idea that hit me was, as far as how we look at things from the Earth, Mercury and Venus are the only ones that, so to speak, orbit around the sun. They're always found within a certain distance from the sun, whereas the Mars, Jupiter, everything outside is not restricted in the same way. And so I was thinking, if a similar inversion has happened, the same kind of inversion that happens between the regular circle and the inverse circle being, from the outside in rather than from the inside out. That circle is of a totally different quality from the circle drawn with respect to the central point. So in this case, the circle drawn with respect to the central point would be what would reference to Earth, and the circle drawn with a different point would be that of the sun. So you have 2 different kinds of circles, one for Mercury and Venus, and one for everything that is related to the Earth and geocentric. So that's another place where the inversion of quality kicks in for the curves. And just wanted to mention that here, because that's going to come up again later on. Yeah.
There's another lecture by Steiner where he deals with the relationship between curves and the four operations. I have a note here in the Italian edition, and I followed it. It was a conference from 1914, so it was earlier than the one we're reading now, and it's a conference about architecture. It's just a part of the lecture that is about the four operations, but I will link it to you. I think it can be helpful in that since Steiner there is describing the shapes as applied to architecture. He also speaks about the different sensations, feelings we get while contemplating this kind of structures. And I think it's intuitively, it gives something more to understand this concept, particularly the difference between the extroverted circle and the introverted circle. And I will link it here.
One of the images I found helpful when I was reading about Cassini curves is to imagine what's being described as a bisection of a torus, and that the torus shape seems especially significant in astronomy and in astrophysics, and to try to understand that motion, the almost hyperdimensional motion, if I can say that, of a torus in two-dimensional terms using the Cassini curve. This is an example of the kind of stepping down of dimensions and the projection of dimensions from higher dimensional space, if I can use space metaphorically there, because usually space means 3 dimensions, onto 3 and then 2 dimensions of just length and width. The exercise of imagination that Steiner's trying to lead us through, and the shift he's trying to provoke, is, you could say, an attempt to take us outside of space. Or am I correct, for those who can answer this question, in thinking that this is actually an invitation into higher dimensional spaces beyond just 3 dimensions? Could we describe it that way? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. That's kind of why he's emphasizing so much on the difference between continuity of thought and continuity of the curve, because in the curve there is a break, there is a clear break at that transition over from the lemniscate, but in thought there is not. There is no break, because it's continuously moving from one value of the ratio to the other value of the ratio. There is continuity there. That is not a continuity that is physically visible, but it is visible to the mind, and that is more important in this respect. It's not enough. People kind of get stuck in the formula. They don't realize they are actually carrying out a continuity of thought exercise. So that's repeated examples of the Cassini curve, of the circle turning inside out, of all these things. The circle turning inside out, you can also think of it like this. You have a circle that is becoming closer and closer to a straight line, and then flips over. So it's something that is kicking in by going into the higher dimension. So at the moment when you're seeing it end on, you only see a line, and then once again you start seeing a circular process. So yeah, I would definitely say where there are gaps, it's very likely that either the process is happening in a higher or a lower dimension. In this case, it's higher.
But also, I think that Steiner is pointing to the opposite fact, that is that if we are able to think something, I mean, it's not really the opposite fact, it's the same fact, but you can look at it from another point of view, that is not really that there are higher dimensions, but that since we can think about something, that implies that we can think about it in 2 dimensions. That's very, I think that's very important. That's the reason why he's spending energy creating these curves, and there are curves in 2 dimensions. And he's not interested. By the end of the chapter, someone tells him, yeah, we can represent that with a video. And he says, yeah, but I'm not interested in the video. I want a shape, like a line in 2 dimensions that I can look at synchronously in just one single instant, and that it can represent everything that my thinking is doing. And to me, that's consequence of the philosophical, epistemological, gnoseological theory that underlies anthroposophy, that we studied at least partially in the philosophy of freedom. It is that representation is something that has already been acted on by thought, and both perception and representation are 2-dimensional. So thinking must go, must work on that level. So if we actually can think something, well, it must be something that lives in 2 dimensions. The 3rd dimension, the 4th dimension, whatever, are things that we derive, but there is like a bottleneck in thought, and that's 2-dimensional. And I think that's why he's so interested in showing that the operations that are things that we do with language, and so with thought all the time, because, you know, natural language is a bit like algebra. We say, I saw 3 lions near the shore. Okay, I say 3 lions. That's like saying 3a, 3x. And that's because in algebra, you know, the multiplication is implied. You just get number and the thing, the unknown, and that's the coefficient and the unknown. And so that's exactly like language works. And so multiplication, division, the 4 operations are things that we continuously imply with our thought. And so this is also implied in representation and in the difference between perception and representation. So there must be this bottleneck, which is 2-dimensional, and Steiner is showing us that this is possible. And by the way, this is also something that you can see in the shape of the structure of analog calculators, analog computers. If you watch how people did complex calculations, let's say during the Second World War, they had no computers. So let's say in a ship, they had to calculate very, very quickly integrals and derivatives and stuff like that. And to do that, they actually had machines and gears that had the kind of shapes we are studying now. So you see, like, let's say a lemniscate, how do you say, drive for let's say the wheel of a machine, and that's a part that it's needed in the analog calculator, in the machine, something that has that very shape to make that calculation. So you can see all this kind of very, very beautiful machines that are now obsolete, but where you can find that all kind of mathematics implies very specific shapes that are in the gears, and you can recognize them.
Go ahead, Karsten.
Thanks. I think my internet connection might be a bit bad here, so I hope you can all hear me and see me. But there are, I mean, I don't know that much about Steiner's thinking, but there are a lot of things that I found interesting here. So one was what I conceive to be some kind of dynamical view of mathematical shapes, that to comprehend some kind of mathematical shape, you kind of have to think it dynamically, like perhaps like a point moving along a curve. So that's one thing I think is interesting, because it's at odds with a lot of mathematical thinking that tends to understand mathematical shapes as something static, like perhaps also the traditional Platonic view. If that's the Platonic view, I'm not sure about that. And another thing is his use of the concept of continuity as kind of a normative principle. So the continuity of consciousness is a normative principle that he applies to understand apparent discontinuities and kind of understand them at the deeper level. This thing that he kind of suggests that we should say, to preserve continuity of consciousness, we have to move out of space to understand the unity of that mathematical shape that we are observing. So in a sense, I think it's some kind of Kantian thinking, actually, like it's an expansion of this idea of the transcendental apperception, the fact that consciousness is a unity or a continuity, which in my book is the same thing. So I think there's something very interesting about methodology that kind of, I mean, I don't know if you have to argue that consciousness is actually continuous, because I'm not sure that everybody would accept that. I easily.
Well, your connection's breaking up a bit now, Carsten.
But I just see it as some kind of norm.
Carsten, you might try just turning off your video.
I think I was finished.
Audio.
Maybe I don't know if a lot of what I said got lost, or okay, I'll try that.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
I think I finished, but I don't know if you got it all.
We got some of it.
Okay. Really?
Jeff, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I want to pick up on this powerful idea of the going out of space and coming back in. It's very valuable to me to see how we demonstrated all that mathematically. So I have enough high school math and all that. I follow the basics of it, but it's very powerful to me because I could now take that and plug it back in, to my world, into Hahnemann, into Reich. No one is surprised I'm saying those things, but just for example, starting with Hahnemann's concept of disease, which generally, we would say in Steiner's terms that disease is a phenomenon and exists in the etheric body, right? And that's for so many people that's a very difficult concept, right? Because we are, even myself, even when we're educated through Steiner and otherwise, we still have to work against our current evolutionary state, which is very materially based, right? And actually Steiner, I forget which lecture, but he talks directly to that point about how we are kind of eclipsed, so to speak, by the mineral kingdom. We have very hard time understanding the other kingdoms and understanding life and things like that. I forget which lecture he says that, but anyways, coming back to Hahnemann's concept of disease, this is really crystallizing for me, because it's like, to really grasp that, we have to do this operation of, so to speak, going out of space and coming back in to understand where is disease. So it's not in the liver, it's not in a physical part, but it's this out of space phenomenon that's kind of coming back into space in that sense. So that's one aspect. And oh yeah, and there's another thing around the great criticism that's always leveled against homeopathy. Oh, it's bogus, it can't work. This idea of the wrong concept is even used in the criticism, diluting remedies, and that there's no molecule left, and blah blah blah. I'm sorry, I'm going to yawn at that. I've heard it a million times, but this idea of potentizing a homeopathic remedy, the way it's actually created, is we have to bring in our lemniscate here, because when that homeopathic remedy in preparation is being succussed, it essentially creates that lemniscate form in the liquid, right? And again, we can talk about our going out of space and coming back into space, and what is actually composing, the reality of what that medicine is. So there's all of that, and one more thing I would add too is we can tie all of the above, Steiner, Hahnemann, and all these ideas of disease and everything, back into Reich when we look at his idea of life energy, not just an idea. He demonstrated it scientifically, and he talks about this orgone energy, this life energy, being what he calls an energy before matter. So that's, to me, that's just another way of saying going out of space and coming back in again. So anyways, I can expand on all of that, but that's as I'm saying, a very, very powerful crystallizing moment for me to to bring all this together through math as a very palpable, what did he say, palpably impalpable way of looking at all this.
Thanks for those connections, Jeff. Gopi, I saw your hand.
Jeff actually brought the topic to something very interesting. When you look at the Cassini curve, the initial curve is drawn kind of like that, right? And then it starts to get pinched off into a dumbbell shape. And then at the point when you hit the lemniscate, look at how the finger is moving. This is how the movement of the mathematics actually goes. It doesn't go like this. It's an interesting conundrum there, which you actually follow it in thought, because you obviously go all the way around the kind of oval, and then you go like that around the dumbbell. And in order to continue that, you have to be able to bounce off that middle point in order to go to the lemniscate motion. Somebody actually came up with this idea towards the end of the lecture, either this lecture or some other lecture, and he's because the lemniscate is like this, it's just going like an 8 form, and you are speaking of continued thought, and continuity of thought and movement is telling us it's like a double 3. The points out says actually the reason is because you are dealing with living forms. So the first lobe and the second lobe are not necessarily in the same plane. So what happens is that bounce actually doesn't look like a bounce, as you are going with lobes which are not in the same plane. It just moves continuously over. So my basic point being that how far even a reasonably accurate geometrical image can be from the actual movement. So there is the geometry, then there is the continuity of thought, and then there is the actual movement. Because in case of the astronomy, we are dealing with actual movement. Something can be geometrically and continuously correct, or at least in continuity of thought, and yet not match up to the reality, which requires a movement of a higher order in order to bring that. Just food for thought on that one, because that's I think is the critical point. And then the other comment I had was about the movie. I think it was Carl Unger who brought that up and said, hey, yeah, this is what is done, and there is a deception. So I don't know what the German word being used over here is, but the intent of the phrase deception is very, very like heavy. What does he mean? Like, what deception is being spoken of in this case with the cinema? One in back in his day, the one deception is that of continuity, because you have a series of images. You don't really have one image transforming directly into another image. So you don't actually have movement. It is the illusion of movement caused by persistence of vision, whatnot. So that is one level of deception. And today in the computer world, we have a second layer to that, and that is the computer cannot really draw a circle. It cannot draw a curve. It cannot even draw all the straight lines. The computer can only draw exactly true to, more or less true to its physics. It can only draw two lines, the vertical and the horizontal. It can approximate a 45-degree line by putting small, like, boxes, squares, edge point to point, like how when you take the old Microsoft Paint and you really zoom up and get a big fat cursor with it's like that big, and then you try to draw a line, you can see that the line is only proper when it is horizontal, vertical, or when you kind of laid it at 45-degree angles. Any other line, then you have odd things happen, like two squares black like this and one square up here, and then two squares like this and one square up here. So there are various, variations of that. You never actually, like physically, you don't have a straight line. You only have series of squares, chock-a-block, like Lego, being put next to each other to approximate. Now, instead of the persistence of vision, you're fooling yourself because of the scale of vision, that you don't actually look at this through the microscope. You don't look at the screen through the microscope. So you don't actually see that you are not drawing even a slant line. You're actually drawing tick, tick, tick steps. And curves are completely out of the question. You can't draw a single curve in terms of the computer screen, even without bothering about continuity issues. So yeah, there is like technological deceptions that are embedded with the tech, which I think we should all be conscious of while doing all this. Yeah.
Gopi, can I ask just a clarifying question about the lemniscate
Sure.
form that you were trying to maintain continuity with? Is the idea here that when we're thinking of, I mean, later on in lecture 12, Steiner talks about how the Earth follows the sun
Yeah.
in this sort of a pattern, like
Yeah.
was this
Yeah,
image here?
Yeah.
Is that what you're describing? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's
So it's
helpful.
even the lemniscate as such, as a figure, it's correct, but in terms
Right.
of the actual movement, it's still not correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Lorenzo, I see your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to answer these points. I don't think that the optical phenomena that Gopi was talking about regarding cinema are relevant to the point here, or was what Steiner was talking about. The point is not that we don't actually have a copy of the real phenomenon. It's just conceptual. I mean, Steiner wants the shape, it must not be a copy. He wants to know the shape that's implied in some kind of thoughts that we make all the time. And the problem with cinema is that it shows you a continuity with a moving image. So you don't actually have two dimensions. You introduce time, you have a moving image, even if cinema was continuous and you got a perfect cinema and with infinite definition, it would be the same. The point is just that you get a representation of the continuity of the curve that that implies a movement of the point of view. And so this is not, this would not answer Steiner's problem, which is I want to know a shape, unmoving shape in two dimensions that must show me the continuity. And that's the same problem that one deals with, as again, with analog computers. That's a very real movement, and you have to get that shape. It's not that you get, a representation of it through a moving image, because otherwise you would have to construct a 4-dimensional gear or something like that. No, you're interested in a shape that you can build, and that's a point. Another thing is that the continuity of the lemniscate. I don't think that Steiner is trying here to say that Cassini curves represent the movement of the planets directly. I don't think that the shape that you see in the epicycles are Cassini curves. It's not what he's saying here. He's dealing with the idea that when we multiply, and as I said, we multiply every time that we use names. We use names, universals. I see there are 3 bottles on my table. Okay, I'm using that shape, and that the Cassini curves have some characteristics that we will explore and that are interesting in the relationship between perception and representation, and they are embodied, let's say, so in thinking, but or embedded. But we should not confuse these different levels. I think there's nothing to do about cinema. As I said, even a continuous cinema, was it possible? What Steiner is saying is that if you gave me some kind of representation that I have to circle around so that I get the sense of continuity, it would not be an answer for my problem, because I have this bottleneck and I want to see a fixed shape. That's what's interesting to me. The same problem of the analog computer designer.
Yeah, I think here, Lorenzo, of these depictions of, sometimes it's called the helical model of the solar system, where you have the sun moving around the galaxy and the other planets are corkscrewing around it, and this is often described as this is the way it really is. But the problem here is that to observe that, you're this disembodied, from this disembodied perspective outside of the solar system, and that's the deception, right? The kind of movement Steiner is talking about would be a depiction of us as our human organism embedded within this process, sort of from the inside out. We have a delusional form of astronomy and physics that imagines we could observe the whole process from the outside, right? And that's what will be depicted in the cinema image. Is that what you're getting at?
This is another point yet, I guess. I mean, this is true, because when you imagine looking at the Earth or the solar system from outside, you're already we're taking for granted, let's say, the continuity of the 3-dimensionality and the continuity of space. You're taking for granted lots of stuff. You have already decided what kind of geometry you are using, while one should, from a phenomenological point of view, one should be open-minded and think that maybe this is completely, let's say, unreal. Of course, maybe with a Euclidean perspective, one can reconstruct things looking at like that, but nobody actually sees. We don't know if there somebody in that position would see things that way. It is possible, that when you move out, everything distorts. We take for granted that things have fixed volumes, or that depth is something that actually exists. Steiner is doing some kind of phenomenological reduction, let's say, so that everything must pass through this filter, which cuts up and mixes up everything. And so the connectivity, the locality are not the same, yet the filter is something that happens through a bottleneck, which is just the two dimensions of our experience, because he is also a realist at the same time. But what I was saying before, it was a broader, I was referring to the fact that he's not interested in the image of continuity. Once again, he's not talking about the orbits. He's not talking about the movement of the planets there. He's talking about the circle, isn't it? The circle that goes to infinity and then switches to the other side. And if I remember correctly, I mean, he's still speaking about the operations. Anyway,
I thought he was.
Really...
Yeah, it seems to me more an analogy for the way that the human is a microcosm of the image of the heavens, and that we need to be able to turn ourselves inside out in a way, is what I took him to be trying to depict there. Angus, what are you thinking? You're still muted. There you go.
Yeah, that's just what you said there, Matt, is exactly what I'm thinking. And in the chat, what I've done is you can see, I don't expect you to, it's a bit meaty to get into here, but in the lecture that I've linked to there, when he's describing this lecture, he's also describing, so this is confused thinking, and I'll try to bring it all together. So there's something real going on, this idea of the reflection. We are reflections of the cosmos, but it sort of like happens within the skull. So he uses this image of the stars sort of like on the inside of our skull, so like as a inverted image, like through a lemniscate of the heavens. And what's interesting here is the lecture that Lorenzo referenced earlier. Was it 282, Lorenzo, that you referenced earlier? In that series that you Lorenzo referenced, there's the picture that I've also put in the chat there, which is again trying to depict this idea of how something is being inverted. So like our skull has been lemniscated, turned inside out, but it's gone through so like that crossover point on the lemniscate to become the inner experience of what is the whole experience of the heavens. And that's what the verse, I believe, here is trying to get to. So having perhaps insufficiently explained what I was getting at here, the reason I brought this into the conversation, and it's been very interesting, is this emphasis that Steiner is trying to gain on moving from quantity to quality. How do we experience this ourselves? It's like it's important to deal with the quantity with the mathematical side, but how do we actually invert this and apply it to ourselves? And so that was the reason for my contribution there. I don't know. Yeah, hopefully it was clear. The text that I've actually linked there, you have to read the whole of that lecture to even begin to understand what he's trying to get at. And there are 3 of these. But for people that are interested in trying to convert it into a quality lighting aspect, I can recommend it.
Thanks, Angus. Anybody else have any thoughts? Well, you figured it out then. You can go home now.
So I'll put out a question there, and it's one that I haven't resolved. And it's how does this continuity relate to the irrational numbers that we were talking about earlier? Because he makes this point about irrational numbers. Without these irrational numbers, so like everything was like collapse into the sun, or sort of life would stop generating something new there. I can only feel. I certainly can't explicate, but somehow I think there's a link here between this irrational numbers and what we've mentally been going through in this chapter. So the importance of addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication to get these different hyperbole, ellipses, and the other two that escape my thinking at this moment. But I saw Gopi; he looked like he had something to add there.
Yeah, it's has this wonderful relation with the idea of infinity. So when you're going out of space, so to speak, you cannot define a finite space. That's basically what he's saying is, nothing finite can be attributed to that point in space. But you have that similar quality with the irrationals. But here the infinity is in its writing down process itself. You can't even write it down. You can't even specify it in the number line as a number. So what would hold for any number like an integer or a ratio or a rational number would not exactly hold for even more than irrational. It will not hold also for transcendentals, which is what the pi's and the e's and all those other numbers come in. So where do you put it on the number line? Wherever you would put it would be a lie, because it cannot be put there with 100% accuracy, because there is no such thing. So yeah, here there is a inner relation between one infinite series and another infinite situation. One where he's speaking of it going out of space completely, so it doesn't really fit in space. In another one, he's speaking of us not being able to grasp. It's going out of number. I'll put it this way. One, it's going out of space. In another, it's going out of number. And in both these regions, we are being thrown into chaos, where again the life process can come in from the other side and fructify the whole thing. So yeah, the two are like brothers. The infinity is connecting both of them.
I think, I mean, my way of trying to understand this is that Steiner is continually drawing us back to our own thinking activity and trying to connect what we do with the imaginative acts of construction when we're engaged in geometry to the movement, the real movement of the heavens. And that there's something about, it's very obvious when we're doing it in our own imagination that we're creating space. And when we don't grasp the connection between the space creating activity that goes on in our imagination to the space creating activity of the movement of the heavens, then we think that we could just measure the movement of bodies through an already created space. And that's basically what a purely gravitational theory of the motion of the planets would be trying to do. And so if that model were accurate, as Steiner says, the planets would just cease or die or fall into the sun or what have you, because the real motion involves a space creating activity, not movement through already created space by dead bodies, right? Yeah. So that's the trap we have to break out of.
Yeah, I would agree. The creativity is that life kicking in, whether it is kicking in as we are trying to think about it, or it's kicking in just as it really exists in the world, and it kind of comes in. the way he speaks of in the fertilization process, whichever direction you go into, you have to deal with this, at the creative activity that is irrational.
And if we go back to, prior to the last ice age, when Steiner was talking about how, our what's now this dim, hazy inner life of mental pictures was more dominant and outward. It's as though we actually learned how to do this inner creative activity from the heavens. But now, after the ice age, we forgot that that's where we learned it from, and we're projecting out this dead calculative geometry onto the heavens again. So we forgot where we internalized this inner capacity. Yeah.
Yep.
Karsten, go ahead. We have a couple minutes left.
I just have a single point. It's about, I think also when we talk about infinity and continuity, it's about identity. So you could say the image we have of universe is something we can measure out, has its kind of reflection in our image of ourselves as something that we can measure out. And I think we're collectively, we are on the brink of this kind of threshold where we are loosening ourselves. We are losing our understanding of ourselves as a finite self, and there is some experience that you can have. I know that for sure, that it's kind of a loss of self, where you kind of fall into infinity, and in this fall into infinity, there is some kind of deeper level experience of who you really are. And I think there's some kind of reflection here between the way that we look at the heavens and the way that we look at ourselves, that I also see Steiner addressing somehow, and wanting us to think about and understand at a deeper level.
Wonderful. Great place to end this week. We'll do lecture 10 next week. If anyone wants to summarize it, do let us know. Thanks so much for your contributions. This is really enlivening. So grateful for your participation. See you all next week,
guys. Yeah. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.